I will call. Okay, and I will go ahead and read the statement that we are required to read by the Office of the State Attorney. The Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's formula for funding public education. Before we begin, the department would like to remind you of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comments and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. That is the statement that we are required to read. So today, we have really two major issues, and a third if we have time to get to some of it, and that would be the policy recommendations. Our sixth meeting will be predominantly the policy recommendations, but today we will spend less time on the base and weights. We will spend a great deal of time on direct funding and outcomes, but the first issue is to discuss the draft overview framework and to list the areas that you did not see covered in the draft overview framework and what things you would like to see in that was not discussed. Are those the major issues, Dominic, that we discussed that we needed to go over today?
Yes, sir, that sounds correct.
So even though I can't see you, I know, Candy, you had some of the things you mentioned that were not included in the overview framework. Would you like to share those with the group and give those to Dominique? She and I have talked about those, but would you like to go over those with the group?
I'm not sure she's on unless she's on a phone number that I'm not picking up. Let me do roll call real quickly, Cato, if you don't mind, just to make sure I have everybody. So I have Tyler, Chris, Ted, Terrence, Kristen, Cardell, and Yolanda, you're for law, correct?
Okay. Okay, that's good. Well, are there any, those of you who were able to preview the funding for student success, the student-based formula draft framework, do you have any of the areas that you did not see covered in here that you would like for our committee to put in their recommendations?
Do we have, Cato, this is Cardell, and maybe it's a question for Dominique. Do we have any ability to see what the committee has previously recommended in the areas and to just directly compare it with what's in here? Because I just feel like that input has been given, and so whether it's there or not is a statement of fact, not just like, let's bring it up as a recommendation again.
What I will do is drop it in the chat for you all to open to see, and then I will keep up the draft formula so that any part that you all want me to navigate to, I can do that. Would that work?
Yeah, that might be helpful.
Does that help?
I think so.
So right now I'm showing on the screen what we our most recent, our most recent recommendations from meeting 4, which we, basically had tried to look over everything we had talked about and make sure that it was included in this list. It's in the files of meeting 5 in the Google Drive, and then I've dropped it here as well. And so if you all can see that, then I can show the pieces of the draft formula on my screen if you are seeing that. Can you see the draft formula or the draft framework?
Yes, we're seeing the draft framework on the screen.
Yeah.
That's what you're, right?
Okay.
And the recommendations you're saying is in the folder under.
Yes, and I also have tried to drop them in the chats to see if you can open those.
Yeah, I think that might be going to on your computer, so I don't think that's going to open. It doesn't look like a web address.
It should have been a web address. Let me try again. Let me try another way. For some reason, it's not letting me attach like I typically can. That is strange. Okay. For some reason, it's not letting me, so let me try one more.
Is that, I think I've got the link on that's the meeting takeaways and recommendations document from the last meeting?
Yes, meeting 4.
Meeting 4, yes.
Oh, thanks. I don't know why my chat is not appearing like it normally does.
No, there you go.
Has everybody been able to access it?
It's not a problem.
Yeah.
No, that's all right. I'll just do this.
And I can pull up a specific part of the framework if you want me to, so that you all can compare it if you want to take it by a specific section. And maybe somebody could even read off for the rest of the group what your recommendations were in that, and then compare it to what's here.
Yeah, because I have the proposed framework in front of me. And for instance, let me give an example. In the base area, the proposed funding for student success formula will fund the following items as part of the base: educator salaries, nurses, counselors and school-based support, RTI support, district-specific needs vary by district, so base may be considered locally driven addition, technology, coordinated school health in every district. That's in the base in the draft funding framework. So what we would need to do is that anything that we had in out that is not in the base in the draft proposal.
Hey, Cato, this is Chris Henson. I'm assuming it's a given. I'm assuming it's a given, but in the base, I would think there would need to be something relating to transportation, maintenance of facilities, things of that nature that I'm not sure I see here, but obviously would be, in the day of the life of a student in a Tennessee public school. So I'm assuming that's
a great point.
included.
That's a great point, because you're right. We have other things we had mentioned, but you're right, I don't see anything in those. So Dominique, did you hear that?
Yes, and I'm going to, I pulled it back up to the paragraph that talks about this framework.
Okay.
And all items that are funded in the current formula in B, in addition to things that are funded outside, those those are accounted for, and it either base or weights. So those would be things I would think that, but I mean, I'm more than happy to add them. But there are certain things that probably are already currently funded that will be continued.
That will stay.
Continue.
Chris, what we'll do when Dominique and I talk later, we will see are those things already in there, because you're right. I remember in our meeting of the committee chairs with the commissioner, she said things that are already being funded will continue to be funded. So we will make sure that's covered.
I appreciate it.
Anything else? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I said I appreciate that. One thing that I wanted to just sort of reiterate, I know that there's been a big issue for deferred maintenance, particularly in urban districts, Shelby County, Metro, others, which would be an improvement that's needed to the current funding amount for that kind of thing, as well as transportation, where, for instance, we don't receive credit for a student that receives transportation if they're within 1.25 miles of their school. And we have lots of places where it just wouldn't be safe for a student to walk over 1.25 miles to their school. And so we provide school bus transportation for those students, but we don't receive any credit for those students in the current formula.
Gotcha. Okay. We will make sure we account for that. Is there anything else anyone can think of? Well, if you do, just shoot either Dominic or me or both of us something, and we will make sure that it is a part of our recommendation.
I think even if there is, because I know similar to what Chris said, like some of these other things that were listed in the committee report, instructional materials, principles, like Chris said, transportation. If there is, because I'm not sure how the decision was made, what to include on this as part of the base and what to assume people would assume is part of the base. So if there's a more exhaustive list of what's included in the base, that might be helpful to circulate to committee members if that exists.
Okay. Yeah, because Dominic, correct me if I'm wrong, Corday, I think what they pull from, and you bring up an excellent point, they pull from the various public comments. And I went through, I bet you I've gone through more public comments than I've ever gone through. And they were trying to pull from all of the various public comments on areas that should be in the base. But you're right, that is a great point. We'll make sure we do that. The next area were weights. And the proposed funding framework includes weights for poverty, concentrated poverty, rural, unique learning needs, charter schools, poverty and concentrated poverty, and it lists that, and it gave heavy recommendations that rural, moderate, in that unique learning needs, and charter schools. Those were the 1, 2, 3, 4 areas that were listed in the draft framework.
You know, we talked a lot about trauma in our discussions, and I don't.
We did.
Students who've experienced trauma or have an ACEs score that's higher, and I don't see that in here anywhere. So I do think that that's something that should be accounted for.
You're right. There's I'm looking at, we got appropriate learning for students with disability, gifted. That's an excellent point. Okay.
This is Tyler, by the way. Sorry.
Yeah, Tyler. Okay, we will add that. What else are we missing in these 4 areas? Yes, go ahead.
This is Candy. How are y'all doing? I'm looking on here, and don't know if it's duplicative. Again, as I mentioned, it's a call out for rural, but not for urban. But if you look at poverty and concentrated poverty, it does call out equally benefits rural and urban districts. And so, what is the reasoning that we don't have urban districts called out? Since, I mean, urban and rural districts have a lot of similarities with the poverty, but I get it, the technology piece in rural areas is a much more challenge. But so that, I guess that's what I've been trying to understand the whole time. For additional weights for poverty and concentrated poverty, are we doing that because those are the challenges in the rural area? And I'm not predominantly in a rural area, but I need a better understanding of that.
I think they may, to me, what I'm seeing there, poverty is rural and concentrated poverty is urban. If that makes sense. That's kind of how I see how they're interpreting the definitions of rural and urban to me.
Dominic, if I'm not mistaken, when we had our meeting as chairs with the commissioner a week ago, that was one of the first issues that came up, and I can't remember how the commissioner addressed that.
So I do know that rural is something that has come up across multiple subcommittees, multiple public comments. So that has been something that has come up over and over and over, and there needs to be a focus, and they're wanting feedback on how do we define rural in Tennessee. So when we get onto the policy recommendations, we'll get into a little bit more of how we're going to define things. And yes, I see the urban districts there with the poverty and concentrated poverty. That's another area that when you get to doing some of the policy considerations, you're going to be asked as a committee what your recommendations are on how Tennessee should define economically disadvantaged and concentration of poverty. But if you all want to include again, or do a call out in the weight section for urban districts specifically, we can add that again into our document of recommendations.
Well, and I think it's, urban and rural have similar needs. However, I think in this explanation, it talks about excellent in classroom supports. Well, we also need excellent in classroom supports and rules. So if you're going to call that out for, again, all means all. And then when here's where it may be different. Transportation. I wholeheartedly agree with that for rural. I also think that technology, right, the internet, that sort of thing, the digital divide with rural is a lot more complex. So I think calling out the right things and not giving additional funding for, in classroom support. So I'm just looking at it from an equity lens, and I understand what the intent is, but I think you have similar challenges. I think Tyler or someone brought up the emotional, like the trauma. Okay, well, that would be something that may be called out in urban districts. So I think just, looking at it from a equity lens, just making sure we're calling out very specific needs that are not the same in both rural and urban. So if you say rural and urban, then say here are the challenges in rural demonstrated by data and evidence, then I think it's fine. But again, it sounds a little duplicative, and it's like if you just call that out, to me it seems like, we just leave the urban district concerns out because we don't call those out specifically.
Okay. So you all tell me exactly what you want in here, and I will put it. So far in the weights, I have students who have experienced trauma or have high ACEs score. Did I capture that one correctly? And then
I'm talking.
No, I know. I'm just trying to make sure
yes,
that I've captured that correctly so far. And then if there's anything specific in the weights with urban districts, you all just tell me how you want it worded, and I'll put it in here.
And Cato, if it's okay, I'll jump in one more time.
Please, go ahead.
Following up on what Candy was saying, I know that we've had several discussions about a cost of living. Needs to be a weight or a consideration. But That may be something that would be over under direct funding because you've got direct funding for fast growing systems,
Right.
et cetera. So I'm not sure of the best place to put that, but I think, some kind of consideration for just the cost differential of an urban district, whether it be the cost of living, cost of housing, the salaries that we have to pay to be able to hire people, just the cost of doing business, would be something that I want to be sure we capture, particularly with the urban subcommittee. And then secondly, looking at the poverty and concentrated poverty weight, it says that the data that they'll use will be direct certification and Title I status. And I know we've also had discussion about how direct certification does not capture all of the students that would be economically disadvantaged because they don't qualify for those benefits through direct certification. And so I don't know exactly how you would calculate it, or maybe it would be something similar to what they use with Title I, which is they use a multiplier because they know that that they're not going to capture everybody, but there would just need to be some way, I hope, to capture all of our economically disadvantaged students that we're required by federal law to educate, and we want to educate, but currently not receiving any credit for them being considered economically disadvantaged because they don't qualify for the direct certification benefits.
I think how you just stated that is probably one of the best ways of saying that. And then also, when we get to the policy area, which I doubt it we'll get to today, let's look at and give some thought between now and the next meeting, how we would like to articulate that in a policy.
So I can go ahead and go down in that portion of this document that I'm working on and put those notes, if you could just restate what you just said, and then we can, when we do get to that part, we can work on it a little bit more, but I would like to capture what you just said, if you could restate it.
Okay.
Broader than direct cert, right?
Correct. Capturing all economically disadvantaged students that may not be captured by direct certification. Capture those in the economically disadvantaged, or I guess they're maybe now calling it the poverty weight.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And can they also give thought to, when we get to the policy section, how we make sure that we articulate this in policy consideration?
Okay.
Okay.
I will.
And did we capture everything we needed to with learning needs and charter schools?
I think part of the unique learning needs would be, what weights are actually used, because it does say that it varies based upon specific student needs, heavy, moderate, and light. And we have a very strong interest in the weight that might be used for English learners. Davidson County has by far the highest number of English learners in the state. Shelby County second. And so there's obviously a need for a strong weight or a heavy weight for students that don't speak English to be able to educate those students.
Great point. Okay. Dominic, were you able to capture some of that, or a portion of how that was laid out?
Yes, sir. Sorry, I couldn't get unmuted.
I know the feeling, believe me. Okay. Charter schools, is it anything we need to add that we did not see covered in charter schools area?
I'll just say that I'm not sure I understand it because it looks like it's only providing a funding weight to a charter school that would utilize a school facility owned by the local school district, because there are large charter schools that don't lease a facility or rent a facility from the local school district that I guess would not receive the weight. So I'm just a little confused about that particular weight and how it would work.
let me add a little clarification.
Yeah,
I'm
you had
looking.
the same one I had. When I read that, I said, okay, I know it's something I'm missing. I just don't know for sure what it is right now.
So students in charter schools would also receive weighted funding for the weighted categories that apply to them. So if they have unique learning needs, they will also get those weights. So that funding would also go to charter schools.
What about the charter schools that don't lease
That are
a
not-
facility from the local school district? It seems from this that they would not receive a weight for that, even though they would have to rent, obviously, from someone else unless they own their own building. So it's just.
So do you know if those charter schools already, they received funding currently? Because there's funding outside of the BEP for charter schools. And I can ask that question. I don't.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Why don't we ask that question, get clarification on that, and get that to you? Because I don't know the answer. I was thinking the same thing. What about those that are standalone that lease facilities from private entities? What was that? And I don't know the answer to that either. Cordell, do you have a feel for that?
What was that again?
It says this funding weight would ensure that when a charter school utilizes a school facility owned by the local school district and incurs all rent plus maintenance and improvement costs to provide school facilities for their students.
Yeah, I
Additional
had a
funding
question.
would be.
Yeah, I had a question about this because I know even when we had conversations even locally about charter compact and charter policies, because this is to some degree some charter schools who are in facilities that are not current public school facilities would probably say that this benefits schools who, and because there's no equal or equitable way to get access to school facilities, that this benefits charter schools who are able to get access to school facilities, where even if they're in outside external facilities, strip mall or built or whatever, that if they're not getting access to facilities funding, they also have renovation and maintenance costs. So I don't know. I think this is well-meaning, but I could even see in the charter school sector this having some challenges from those not in public school facilities.
Why don't we, Dominic, ask for clarification and also mention the concerns that was expressed in our group?
Okay. Yes, I will add that, and then I will send that question in as soon as our meeting is over.
Okay. Well, good. So I think we have exhausted that, but if there's anything that any of you think of that we missed in this, shoot something to me, Dominique, both of us, one of us, to make sure that we cover everything. For the next area that we wanted to spend time, in fact, it'll probably take the rest of our meeting, the two areas, direct funding and outcomes, we are being asked, what are the things in our list, in our group, that we all feel strongly about should be a part of our recommendations? Are there things that we want to take out? Are there things that we feel strongly about, some more so than others? And Dominique, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they wanted us to make sure we went through the direct funding and the outcome section today, right?
Yes, especially on the outcome section, because as it stands, there's a lot of things in there that are high school, and we need to get some feedback on what could be included for elementary, middle, and other ways, of looking at these outcomes. But you can start with funding.
Okay.
This is Tyler. Something that I've mentioned before is incentivizing schools who demonstrate their investment in these students outside of the walls of the schools by partnering with nonprofits who have proven programming to help address the issues that we've identified.
You're right, we did. We talked about that in 2 of our meetings.
Yeah. So I think that should be included. I guess it would be in the, I guess the outcome section talks about a per student bonus, but I'm not sure which section that would be best included in out of those
Yeah,
two.
that's what I was looking at. Is that direct funding or outcomes? Why don't we listen, Dominique and I can talk about it, but should fit in one of those 2 sections.
I also, were you finished with that before I bring up one?
Yeah, thank you.
So, and I brought this one up last time, but I didn't see it in the draft. Since you are trying to differentiate the high school and middle school, finding kind of that middle spot, I think academic growth could be something that's supported for outcomes, because you get these banners and these level 5, level this, level that in growth. So add the resources, because not everybody, like I said, is going to be able to get that. You know, the AP courses and that sort of, those are nice, but if you want to level the playing field for everybody to have the opportunity, that would both cover elementary, middle, and high school. If you look at growth, maybe it's not as a you know, the weight might not be as heavy there, but at least that could cover all levels.
If I can, Candy, you done?
Yeah.
Okay. Just on the direct funding, I would, because she's not here, channel Dr. Whitelaw a little bit and mention literacy again, especially as it's listed as an outcome, and opportunities for support for literacy on an ongoing basis. And, you know, that might be literacy grants or reading grants or something like that we've had previously. In addition, I would also think about some of the pieces that could support transitional components. So like we've got now the 3rd grade retention based on reading. So if there are additional supports that could happen for students who might be behind in 2nd or 3rd grade and at risk of being retained, because we know the issues and the challenges that happen when students are retained. So some direct funding to specifically address that. Also, you know, middle school might be additional support for students who are behind in math, as algebra, I think 1 is seen as a transitional component for middle school. And then I'll continue to bring up the importance of the 9th grade transition for students going from middle school to high school, and that support really should be there for 9th grade students to ensure they're on track. And I would even say for their transition from 8th grade to 9th grade.
Cordell, I had on my list, direct funding, add to list, 9th grade additional dollars for 9th grade on track. I had literacy. I had apprenticeship and internships, summer programming, technology, whole child support, and also had on my list incentivized district for forming partnerships with community partners, and we just talked about that. Nonprofits, not-for-profits, community partners in support of school districts typically fundraise to support schools, so funding them would be helpful. Then I also had cost of living differential in urban areas, cost of housing, higher cost of doing business, cost of living, higher wages, and then professional development for teachers, whole child and whole family support. I had those added on mine. Were those?
There you go. You got the list, Cato. You just need to make them listen to it.
Some days I halfway stumble onto something.
Well, let me tell you all what I have added so far in the direct funding piece, and then you all tell me from what Cato just read that we still need to add. So I had already put the cost of living in urban areas. I've put that both in the weights and the direct funding with a note of I'm not, sure which bucket that best falls in. I have literacy, opportunities to support literacy, like literacy grants. And then I transitional components, additional supports for those going to be retained in third. Clarifying question there. So in this frame, the draft framework, there is the recommendation of providing the funding for the tutoring for those who are at risk of being retained.
Mm-hmm.
Is this in addition, like something in addition to that?
Let's see. I had.
And I'm not. I can't see who's speaking and when I'm typing and sharing my screen, so I'm not sure who said that. But that I had. So if you could clarify the in the middle, and I had something you said with middle school transition, and I missed that, and then the 9th grade transition support. So all I need to include there for that piece.
Yeah, that was me, Dominique Cardell. So yeah, I mentioned the literacy component, especially with the retention challenge, middle school for algebra and math support, and then the 9th grade on track and support for transition to high school.
Thank you. So what else from the list that Cato read does this group feel is very important to be included for this recommendations list?
Yeah, Dominic, Cato, this is Ted. I know that in the base, you had listed there coordinated school health in every district. Is there anything related to outcomes related to that, or is that just something that's just kind of said? I know that's been existing in the past, but I know that gets to kids' activity and health in the school day. But I don't know. I was just curious about that.
So I know that one of the reasons is there's not every district has had access to have coordinated school health in their districts. So that being in the base is to have all districts have access. I do not see an outcome related to that. So if there's something you would like to add, we can get that.
Yeah, I probably had more of a question, just if it's a recommendation, just I know it's been there in the past, but I think I understand it. You're trying to get that in every single district as a part of the base. And I was just curious. I know health contributes to the success too of the learning and academic achievement. So I didn't know if there were things being related to a child's health status, but maybe that's not a part of this conversation.
Well, I know in the outcomes that I have, we have self-reported student survey, mental health measures, ACEs, which we see a great deal in our children's hospitals. We have that in the area. And you're right, we did talk about that as a group.
One thing I would like to add in the outcomes area would be, if it's going to be based on some kind of standardized test like literacy, I think it's very important that growth have a high priority, because obviously districts have different socioeconomic levels and strong correlation between socioeconomic status and standardized testing. And so I would want to not just see the achievement level being considered in the outcome, but the growth that occurs with our students, if there's going to be some kind of outcome relating to that.
You know, that's a good point. One of the outcomes that I had on my list was ways to fund outcomes that aren't punitive, especially for struggling districts. And so, no, I think you're right. I think that's an excellent point. Let's see, what else do we have? Outcome, closing achievement gap. In direct funding, we also had professional development for teachers, whole child and whole family support. So is there anything else that we're missing that we feel strongly? I think the things we've all just mentioned, we feel strongly should be in there. Are there any other things that we feel strongly should be in there? Dominic, was it anything we missed in those two?
Let me just, I've already read back what I had in direct funding, so let me read back what I have in outcomes. And Cato, I did not catch your last piece of whether you wanted that in, where you wanted that. So far I have incentivized districts that are partnering with community partners that benefit the students, academic growth for all grade bands, and mental health measures such as ACEs and student surveys.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What did I miss?
The other that I mentioned was professional development for teachers, and that was under direct funding. And whole child and whole family support, that was also under direct funding. And I just wanted to know from the group, are those two you feel should be in there? We had added those to discuss in our last meeting.
And I would like to advocate for professional development for teachers specifically because the current BEP funding formula does not have any component in it for professional development for teachers. So that would be something that wouldn't just be carried forward from the current funding formula.
Great. That's why we discussed. Thank you. Excellent point. Okay. The other area.
I'm sorry.
Please,
there are some additional considerations that have been supported by subcommittees that haven't actually, that aren't listed up in some of those buckets. And I thought it might be good for your group to look at those.
Good point.
You said you have your draft formula. I know you can't see what I'm sharing, but if you all want to, I've pulled it up on the screen. If you all want to have, if you all have any thoughts about this section, I will take note.
So is there anything there that you think we need to make sure we consider that we need to add? Or that we have entirely missed?
You know, I'm not in the education space as much as all of you all are, but when I look at the incentivizing schools who produce youth who are testing at a 21 or higher on the ACT, I just can't help but think that that's a really high number. I know, especially where I'm at here, we've done some pilot programs, and that was one of our bases, and we did not reach it for a lot of our kids. But what we focused on rather was encouraging and working with the school to encourage our kids to take the ACT multiple times. So I don't know if there can be any way we can account for that. Encouraging schools to work with students to take the ACT multiple times, knowing that it can be paid for multiple times, and instead of focusing just on that outcome, that number.
Would that be covered, or could we cover that in direct funding where we talked about tutoring? We talked about funding in different areas for tutoring. Students have individualized learning plans, and I agree with you. I totally agree with what you just said. And maybe we can find a way to, because I know somewhere where we talked about, let me find it. I know I have it in my notes where we talked about funding for in outcomes, funding for those students taking ACT and SAT who were having problems with that. There's a way we should have that, and I totally agree with you.
Thank you.
What else, group, are we missing in those two areas that we want to make sure, because our next meeting, we will spend the majority of the meeting in the policy definition and consideration area. So we want to make sure that we have the things in here that we really want to have submitted as from our group. Is everyone pretty comfortable with what we've discussed so far?
Just one thing I'll add, if it's okay, relating to the base weight. I know it says educator salaries, which, you know, that salary amount needs to be adjusted upward for educators, but also the way that the number of teachers are calculated. Currently, the BEP formula uses overall district enrollment and divides by 20, for instance, for kindergarten through third grade students to generate a certain number of teachers. But school districts are required to meet class size requirements in each individual school. And those students don't come to our schools in nice, neat bundles of 20 or 25. So districts always have to hire more teachers than are generated through the formula. And so if the formula could take into consideration individual schools in calculating number of teachers, since that's where class sizes have to be met, instead of just looking at overall district enrollment.
Okay. And you would make that consideration in the base?
Yes, it could be something added maybe to educator salaries, but, you know, it's almost a given. It's, you know, it should be a given, I guess, that you know, that your formula generates the number of teachers that you're required to have to meet class size requirements that are in state law, but the current formula does not.
Gotcha.
So I have added that up under the base section. And then for outcomes, I added ACT, some ways to incentivize students for multiple attempts on the ACT other than the score of 21. Does that capture what you all were saying?
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay.
It does for me. Is everyone else comfortable with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Dominic, what else have we missed in those two areas? I'm trying to be respectful of your time since I was the one late this time. What else did we need to make sure that we cover that we had talked about we need to get done in this time frame?
We had talked about possibly just previewing at the end the policy considerations that we'll be looking at in meeting 6. So I can show, it's in the folder, but I can also pull that up and just let you all see it so that you can begin to start thinking about the feedback that you would want to give around these policies. And some of this, you will see things that say question. That's questions that have come from the steering committee that they want feedback from the subcommittees on. So you'll see here next week, you'll be talking about further defining economically disadvantaged.
Definition of concentration of poverty, definition of sparsity, policy, teacher salary, question. What, if any, requirements should the formula require on investing new education dollars in existing education salaries moving forward? And Dominic, I'm glad because I had that before me. If the committee would, if you could spend some time between now and our next meeting, really looking at these, because there are quite some major policy questions that they're asking. So if you could jot some things down on 2 or 3 that really jump out at you, so we'll be able to go through this. And Dominic, is it next week that all of the subcommittees will be going through the policy side?
Yes, that's to be the focus of next meeting.
Okay.
There may be some things in addition to this list that will come up from the meetings this week, but it'll be around defining things for Tennessee and policy considerations.
Okay. So is there anything else for the good of the body that we need to discuss today, Dominique? Is there anything, did we give you all you need to report back to the department?
Yes, I mean, this is your group's list, so as long as everything that I have been reading back from the sections has been as long as I'm capturing everything you want captured, then I think you are in a good place.
Good. No, I think you did. Is there anything else from the group we need to discuss before in our next 4 minutes? Well, once again, let me thank all of you. You have been very generous with your time. We've now had 5 meetings, and there's still a lot more to do, but you've been great making sure every single meeting you've given me your input. And if there are things you think of, don't hesitate to shoot me a note, shoot Dominique a note. Dominique, let me thank you. You allow me to bother you constantly, even though you have other committees to staff and work with. But let me thank all of you. Have a good weekend. And if there's anything you think of, just contact me.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.